We often think about huge economic disasters, like the Great Depression or the 2008 financial crisis, as these totally unpredictable freak accidents, right? Like a lightning bolt from a clear blue sky. But what if that's not the whole story? What if the seeds of disaster are actually buried deep inside the normal, everyday workings of our economy? So here's our roadmap. We're going to start with the economic disaster puzzle, then get into a really unsettling discovery. We'll look at the two key ingredients for a collapse, see how economies can literally fall off a cliff, and finally, we'll ask the big question, are markets naturally unstable? All right, let's dive right into part one, the economic disaster puzzle. This really gets to the heart of a huge challenge for modern economics.
It's the fundamental question, isn't it? I mean, events like the Great Depression and the Great Recession were absolutely devastating. And it wasn't just how deep they were, but how suddenly they happened. How can a system that seems to be chugging along just fine one day suddenly go into a complete and catastrophic nosedive?
For a long, long time, the standard explanation was pretty simple. Some huge external shock must have hit the system. But then 2008 happened, and that theory just didn't quite fit. The initial problems didn't seem nearly big enough to cause the global collapse that followed. And that slow, painful recovery, it baffled economists. Something was clearly missing from their model. And this is where things get really interesting. This brings us to a deeply unsettling discovery. The researchers behind this paper, they found the answer not by looking for some bigger, scarier shock from the outside, but by looking inside the economic machine itself. Okay, just listen to this. This is the very first sentence of their paper. Market economies are intrinsically unstable. Wow. I mean, that's a bold claim, right? It completely flips conventional wisdom on its head. They're basically arguing that the potential for a total collapse isn't some external threat. It's a built-in feature of how our economies work. They even gave this phenomenon a name, an endogenous disaster. Now, endogenous is a bit of a fancy word, but all it means is coming from within. So we're talking about a crash that the economy creates all by itself, just through its normal internal gears grinding away. No massive single blow from the outside needed. Here's a great way to think about it. Is the economy crashing because a giant asteroid hit it? That's the old external shock theory. Or is it crashing because there's a hidden bug in its own programming, a flaw that only shows up under certain conditions? Well, this paper argues it's the hidden bug. So if the problem is a bug in the code, what exactly is it? Well, the paper identifies a very specific recipe for disaster, and it only requires two key ingredients. And here they are: inertial wages and rigid hiring costs. Now, I know these might sound a bit academic, but trust me, the ideas behind them are surprisingly simple and intuitive. Let's start with inertial wages. Okay, so when the economy starts to slow down and company profits take a hit, wages tend to be, well, sticky. They just don't go down as fast. The paper calls them inertial because they have this incredible momentum. Think of a giant oil tanker. You can't just turn it on a dime, right? It's the same with wages. And this puts a really severe squeeze on companies. Now, the second ingredient is rigid hiring costs. Logically, you'd think that when unemployment is high and lots of people are looking for work, it should get way cheaper for companies to hire, right? Well, it turns out that the costs of posting jobs, interviewing candidates, and finding the right person, they don't really fall that much. So even in a bad economy, hiring stays stubbornly expensive. So how do these two things, sticky wages and expensive hiring, combine to create a catastrophe? This is where we get to the tipping point. This is where two seemingly minor issues build up and push the whole system over the edge. It all comes together in this incredibly dangerous feedback loop. It doesn't start with one big boom. Instead, you just get a bunch of normal, small, negative shocks hitting the economy. But because wages have that inertia, company profits get squeezed hard. At the very same time, hiring costs are still high. So what do firms do? They just stop creating new jobs. But here's the thing. People are still losing their existing jobs at a normal rate. And that is the tipping point. The moment job creation grinds to a halt, that's when the economy falls off a cliff. So the researchers built a model with these two ingredients baked in, and they ran thousands of simulations. And the result? It's absolutely stunning. The disasters their model created, just from these internal flaws, caused an average drop in output of 22%. And here's the kicker, the part that gives you chills. That 22% figure, It's not just some random number their computer spit out. It is the exact same average size of real-world economic disasters from over a century of data across dozens of countries. The model, just by including these two internal glitches, perfectly replicated the severity of actual history. That's incredible. So what really makes wages so sticky in the first place? The paper points to a really key factor: how much financial support people have when they're out of a job. Things like unemployment benefits or savings. When that support is higher, workers have less pressure to take a pay cut, which makes the whole system more inertial. And look at this chart. It shows just how critical this is. The model with high wage inertia on the left has a very real risk of disaster, but the one with low inertia, almost zero risk. That wage stickiness is the linchpin of the whole thing. So, after all of this, what's the big takeaway? Where does this really profound research leave us? Well, let's just quickly recap what this paper really did. First, it found the potential for a massive disaster hiding in plain sight, inside a standard economic model. Second, it showed that these huge crashes can be entirely self-generated. Third, it gives us a really compelling new way to explain events like the Great Depression, focused on that toxic mix of sticky wages and rigid hiring. And finally, it's a powerful reminder that economies don't always behave in simple, linear ways. So this brings us to the core unsettling takeaway. What if economic crashes aren't bugs, but features? What if the system itself is designed in a way that, under just the right series of small shocks, it is naturally prone to catastrophic failure? That's the powerful and, frankly, a little scary conclusion that this research points us towards. And that leaves all of us with a final, really urgent question. If the flaw is baked right into the system, how can we possibly protect ourselves? How do we build guardrails to prevent the economy from falling off that cliff again? That is the critical challenge this work leaves us all to think about.